My girlfriend slept with my cousin while I was building our future alone, so I ended everything silently, and what happened after destroyed her ego completely. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for the past 2 years, I've been working day and night to build a future with Sarah. Most of my nights were spent at the office, eyes burning from spreadsheets and contracts, hands stiff from endless typing, while weekends disappeared into unpaid overtime. I skipped nights out with friends, canceled trips, and watched my social life shrink down to nothing because every penny I earned was being saved for the house we dreamed about, the life we'd promised each other. I told myself it was worth it, T1, who feels secure, to feel like I was giving everything I had, so our future would be solid. Sarah. She was amazing on the surface. Charming, affectionate, always smiling when I walked through the door after a 14-hour day. She'd greet me with coffee, kiss my cheek, or send me little texts during the day like, "Hope your meeting goes well, love. Can't wait for our weekend plans." I felt proud of being the guy she leaned on, the one who carried the weight quietly so she could enjoy the lighter things in life. She'd talk about the house we'd buy, the kitchen we'd redo together, our weekend getaways, and eventually, our engagement. Every plan felt tangible, real, and mine to protect. But even in those perfect moments, there were tiny cracks. Sometimes, I'd catch her laughing a little too long at someone else's joke, or notice lingering glances she didn't expect me to see. I'd feel a pang in my chest, but I told myself it was nothing, just harmless attention she was giving. I had to trust her. I had to believe in the life we were building still. There were nights when I lay in bed after work, staring at the ceiling, hands sore, eyes dry, wondering if all the sacrifices I was making, every late night, every skipped dinner, every penny saved were truly appreciated. Did she see how much I was giving? Or was I just quietly disappearing into the background of her life while she basked in the comfort I was creating? I wanted to believe she noticed. I wanted to believe we were on the same path. But deep down, a small nagging worry lingered, whispering that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one thinking about the future we shared. Over the next few months, I started noticing things I should have taken more seriously. Little habits, small patterns that I told myself were nothing but looking back. They were warnings. Sarah started spending more time on her phone, always with it tucked just out of my sight. She'd laugh quietly at texts and swipe through messages when I wasn't looking. I'd ask, "Who's that?" And she'd just shrug with that charming smile and say, "Just a friend, don't worry about it." And somehow, I never worried. I wanted to trust her. I had to. Then there was Jake, my cousin. He'd pop by unannounced sometimes, dropping off something or just hanging out for a bit. On the surface, he was friendly, easygoing, always making jokes. But Sarah and Jake had this way of exchanging glances, these little inside jokes that made me pause mid-sentence. I tried to laugh them off, thinking I was imagining things. I mean, we're family, right? Cousins hang out, they joke. But there was something in the way she leaned toward him when she laughed. In the way their eyes met just a second too long. I remember sitting alone one night in our tiny apartment, the hum of the heater filling the silence while I pored over numbers for the house deposit. I felt a mixture of pride and unease. Pride because I was building something real, something permanent for us. Unease because a small voice in the back of my head kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the center of her world the way I thought I was. And yet, I ignored it. I told myself these were coincidences, paranoia born from stress. Sarah praised me endlessly for working so hard, for providing for both of us. Every compliment felt like validation, and it drowned out the whispers of doubt. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the very people I trusted the most, the cousin I considered family, might be playing roles in a story I didn't fully understand yet. I just didn't know how close I was to discovering just how wrong I was. By this point, work had become my entire world. I'd wake before dawn, stumble out of bed to brew coffee, and stare at spreadsheets until my eyes felt like sandpaper. Every overtime shift, every late-night client call, every extra project I took on wasn't just for MIT, was for us. I imagined Sarah walking into our future home, a place I had fought tooth and nail to save for. And it kept me going through exhaustion that felt like it would never end. Sarah seemed supportive, on the surface. She'd make me breakfast sometimes, leave little notes in my bag, and call during the day to check in. "How's my hard-working man?" she'd say, her voice light and cheerful. I wanted to believe her, and I did. But I also started noticing subtle things that didn't sit right. She'd get unusually quiet when I tried to ask about her day. She'd glance at her phone more often, even in my presence, and quickly switch screens when I looked. And then there was Jake, even when he wasn't visiting. I could feel the tension in the air, this unspoken connection between him and Sarah that made my stomach twist. A photo on social media here, a shared meme there, harmless-seeming things that now feel like neon signs I refuse to read. I'd catch myself staring at my phone during breaks, heart thudding, trying to see if she'd text him. And every time, I told myself I was imagining things. I'm just stressed from work, I'd think. I'm tired. It's nothing yet. There were nights when I came home to an empty apartment and the faint smell of her perfume lingering, and I'd wonder where she'd been, who she'd seen. The excitement and pride I felt about building our life together began to mix with unease. Still, I pushed forward, telling myself that dedication would pay off, that she'd appreciate everything I was doing. I didn't realize that my relentless focus on providing was blinding me to the reality right in front of me. And then, one night, I saw something that made my stomach drop, a glimpse of a message on her phone that made me freeze in place. I shouldn't have seen it, but I did. Things started unraveling slowly, almost imperceptibly, but the cracks were there, widening every day. Sarah's compliments became tinged with passive aggressiveness. "You work so hard. Maybe too hard for us," she'd say one evening, plopping onto the couch with a look that was part exhaustion, part subtle accusation. I tried to laugh it off, joking, "Someone's gotta pay for our future, right?" But inside, a dull ache was growing. Her words, once comforting, now pricked at me, reminding me that the person I trusted most might be resenting the very sacrifices I made for us. Then came the photos. Social media, of all things, became a minefield. I scrolled through an innocuous post and froze. There they were, Sarah and Jake, laughing together, arms brushing, faces close, captured mid-laugh in a moment that should have been private. My chest tightened, heart hammering, and I couldn't look away. They were too comfortable, too familiar. I felt sick trying to rationalize it. Maybe they're just joking, being cousins, right? But even as I tried to reason, the unease festered. Sarah's excuses started piling up: late nights at work, sudden errands, vague explanations that didn't quite add up. When I asked, she'd smile, smooth over my worries. "Don't worry so much. You're imagining things." And part of me wanted to believe her, because believing the truth would hurt too much. I caught myself replaying moments, every subtle glance, every laugh, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I remembered our plans, our dreams, and the countless hours I spent building the life we were supposed to share. And with every memory, the pit in my stomach grew, twisting tighter, whispering that something was off. I wanted to confront her, to demand honesty, but fear and denial held me back. What if I was wrong? What if it was nothing? And yet, I couldn't shake the growing suspicion that maybe my dedication, my sacrifices, weren't just unnoticed, they were being taken for granted in ways I couldn't imagine. That night, lying in our bed with her side cold and empty, I realized I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was happening behind my back, and I was dangerously close to finding out exactly what. It hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. I was sorting through some papers on the kitchen counter when my phone buzzed with a notification, a message that wasn't meant for me, but somehow had popped up in my notifications because of a syncing error. I froze, eyes scanning the screen, and my heart sank faster than it ever had. There it was. Texts. Explicit, intimate, undeniable. Sarah and Jake. Not just flirting plans, confessions, moments I hadn't been a part of. Moments that were supposed to be ours. I sank onto the chair, hands shaking. Coffee on the counter went cold, untouched. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the faint creak of the floorboards, the clock ticking, and all of it felt distant, almost unreal. My mind raced. How long has this been going on? How much of my life was a lie? The betrayal wasn't just a stab in the back. It was a full-on gut punch from two of the people I trusted most. I felt everything at once. Shock, anger, heartbreak, humiliation. I remembered all the late nights I'd spent crunching numbers, skipping dinners, pouring my soul into building a future we'd planned together. And for what? So she could throw it away with my own cousin. I could barely breathe, the room spinning around me. I thought about confronting her, shouting, crying, demanding answers. But part of me knew that raw confrontation would be messy, public, and perhaps satisfying for a moment, but wouldn't give me the control I desperately wanted. I realized I was standing at a crossroads: react in the heat of the moment, or step back, process, and plan. The betrayal stung so deeply that I could barely think. My chest felt heavy, eyes prickling with the beginnings of tears I refused to let fall. It was the lowest I had felt in years, the rock bottom of all the trust I had placed, all the hope I had invested. I left the kitchen without saying a word. Walking past her in the living room, pretending everything was normal, she didn't notice, or maybe she just didn't care. And as I stared out the window into the dark night, the weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me, and I realized my life, the one I had been building for us, would never be the same. And that's when I made a decision, one that would change everything, silently, without a word. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The anger, the heartbreak, the nausea, they were still there but mingled with something sharper: determination. I wasn't going to scream, beg, or plead. I wasn't going to let her see me crumble. This betrayal had been loud and messy on its own. My response would be quiet, controlled, and unshakable. I went about my morning like nothing had happened, pouring coffee, packing my bag for work, smiling politely when she came into the kitchen. Sarah chirped a cheerful morning love. "Sleep, okay?" And I nodded, silent, calm. Not a hint of the storm inside me showed on my face. It was almost eerie how still and composed I felt while my world had quietly shattered around me. When the moment came to end things, I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw accusations or plead for an explanation. I simply said, "I think we need some space. This isn't working for me anymore." Her brows furrowed, confusion flashing across her face. "What do you mean? Did I do something?" she asked, voiced a mixture of hurt and defensiveness. I didn't answer beyond the quiet. "I can't do this. I'm done." The apartment was thick with tension, yet I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to expose her lies she already knew I knew. The silence itself was sharper than any confrontation could be. She sputtered, tried to argue, to negotiate, to manipulate, but I simply packed my bag, walked out, and closed the door behind me. Every step I took felt like reclaiming a little piece of my dignity that had been stolen over the past months. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain from the night before, and I breathed deeply, letting it fill my lungs. For the first time in weeks, I felt control again, not over her, not over the situation, but over myself. I knew the path ahead would be messy, socially complicated, and emotionally draining, but it would be mine. And as I walked away from the apartment, leaving Sarah standing, frozen on the other side of the door, I realized something powerful. The silent choice, the controlled exit, was already beginning to unpick the threads of her arrogance and ego, and the fallout had only just started. After I left, the fallout began quietly but steadily. Sarah didn't know what to say to our friends, our mutual acquaintances. She tried to spin the story her way, painting me as distant, cold, or unreasonable. At first, I worried, would people believe her lies? Would my reputation be tarnished because I didn't yell, didn't expose her immediately? But then I realized something crucial. The truth has a way of coming out on its own, especially when lies are messy, and messy they were. Sarah tried to talk her way back into people's favor, but every explanation sounded hollow. She laughed too loudly, overcompensated, and I watched from a distance as the cracks began showing. Mutual friends whispered behind hands, noticing inconsistencies. I stayed silent, letting her stumble through her own web of deception, choosing observation over reaction. It was almost satisfying, her frantic attempts to repair an image that was already eroding before her eyes. Then came the midpoint twist. Jake, my cousin, started showing signs of guilt, small things, subtle comments that hinted at tension between him and Sarah. He admitted in quiet, private moments to friends that she had been manipulative, that things had gotten out of hand, that he hadn't expected the situation to spiral like this. Suddenly, her carefully constructed defense was cracking from within, and I realized that the people I had feared siding against me were now questioning her credibility themselves. Emotionally, it was strange. I felt a mix of vindication, relief, and lingering sadness. My trust had been broken, but I was watching her unravel without lifting a finger. I knew I could step in and confront the truth publicly, but I also understood that silence was more powerful. Letting her collapse under her own weight was the ultimate statement. By the end of that week, I had learned something essential. Sometimes the quietest moves leave the deepest marks. And as I poured another cup of coffee late at night, listening to the faint hum of the city below, I couldn't help but wonder just how far the consequences would reach hand, what Sarah would do next, clueless that the real power now rested with me. While Sarah floundered, I began to rebuild not just emotionally, but strategically. I poured myself into work, focusing on growing my business and improving my financial stability. Every deal I closed, every client I impressed, felt like a quiet victory. I wasn't trying to flaunt it, but I could feel the scales shifting. Where I had once sacrificed tirelessly for our shared future, I was now creating one entirely for myself. Independent, untouchable, Sarah, on the other hand, was starting to feel the consequences of her actions. She had relied on the comfort of my support, the stability I'd provided, and now that safety net was gone. Bills she had never managed alone began to pile up, and friends started noticing her frantic calls, her excuses, and the way she constantly tried to justify herself. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but the social power she once wielded effortlessly was slipping through her fingers. I stayed silent, watching from a distance. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months reached out to me again, noticing my progress, my calm composure, my refusal to let the betrayal define me. Meanwhile, Sarah's attempts to maintain appearances fell flat. She tried reconnecting with social circles we once shared, but people started questioning her stories, her motives, and her integrity. There was a quiet satisfaction in seeing her scramble while I thrived. I didn't gloat, didn't confront. I simply kept moving forward, focused on my life. The contrast between our realities grew starker each day. I was building, expanding, becoming untouchable, while she was shrinking, defensive, desperate. And then one evening, I overheard a friend casually mention a failed attempt Sarah had made to regain some credibility. An attempt to impress someone socially that backfired spectacularly. I smiled faintly, sipping my coffee, letting the satisfaction settle in. The shift wasn't just financial. It was social, emotional, complete. I knew this was just the beginning, that the final pieces of the puzzle, the full unraveling of her ego, were yet to come. And deep down, I couldn't help but wonder how she would react when she realized just how far I had pulled ahead. Silently, without a single word, Sarah's world was starting to crumble, and I watched it unfold like a slow-motion train wreck. Her frantic attempts to maintain control over social circles and mutual friends were failing spectacularly. The more she tried to explain herself, the more contradictions slipped out. People began whispering, questioning her motives, and it became painfully obvious that her charm and manipulation could no longer shield her. What made it even sweeter, though I wouldn't admit it aloud, was that Jake was starting to crack too. My cousin, the one she had leaned on so heavily, began airing his frustrations in quiet, telling friends things he hadn't meant to. He admitted that Sarah had pushed him, manipulated him, and taken advantage of their connection in ways he wasn't proud of. Every time he spilled a little truth, her fragile social armor chipped further. I didn't have to lift a finger. The unraveling was self-inflicted. I felt a mix of vindication and disbelief. It was almost surreal to witness how quickly people could see through the facade. Friends I trusted, the ones whose opinions I valued, started viewing her differently. No one reached out to defend her anymore. Her carefully constructed image of sophistication, charm, and control was replaced with whispers of deceit and selfishness. And then came the moment I had secretly anticipated. Sarah reached out to mutual friends, desperately trying to get them to pick a side to validate her story. I stayed silent, of course, and the outcome was immediate. She looked frantic, her words stumbled, her carefully rehearsed excuses fell flat. I could practically see her ego cracking in real time, a brittle shell giving way to humiliation. Late that night, I reflected on everything: the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the trust I had placed in her, and realized just how powerful quiet action could be. My life was still intact, my dignity preserved, and the universe had a way of balancing the scales. But even as I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, a small part of me wondered, Would Sarah ever fully understand that I didn't need to confront her to destroy the very foundation she had relied on? It happened at a mutual friend's gathering, a place neither of us could avoid. Sarah spotted me across the room, her eyes widening for just a second before she plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I could feel the tension radiating off her. She wanted confrontation, drama, a reaction that would make her feel in control again. But I wasn't giving her that. Not tonight. Not ever. She approached, voice shaky but trying to sound casual. "Can we talk?" I didn't move closer. I didn't raise my voice. I simply shook my head, calm/steady. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, letting the words hang between us like a wall. I could see her frustration boiling beneath the surface, her carefully rehearsed excuses and manipulations collapsing under the weight of my silence around us. Friends and acquaintances watched, sensing the tension but not knowing the full story. Every failed attempt she made to draw me into an argument only made her look smaller, weaker, desperate. I realized, in that moment, that silence had been my greatest weapon. I didn't need to accuse, to shout, to expose. She was destroying herself with every word, every flustered gesture. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I didn't mean for it to. I cut her off without raising my tone, without giving her the satisfaction of reaction. "It's over. You know it." That was all. No lectures, no explanations, no pleading, just control, calm, and certainty. I turned and walked away, feeling the power shift fully into my hands. Every step felt like reclaiming the pieces of myself she had tried to undermine. Around me, the faint hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of friends' voices, it all faded into the background. I didn't need to say more. The message was clear. And as I glanced back one last time, I saw it in her eyes, realization, humiliation, a fractured ego that no apology or excuse could repair. I had walked away silently, and yet, in that quiet, composed exit, I had won everything she thought she could control. After that night, life settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but incredibly freeing. I focused entirely on myself, my work, my growth, and reclaiming the parts of my life I had sacrificed for someone who didn't deserve them. For the first time in months, I slept without that gnawing knot in my chest, without replaying Sarah's laughter in my mind or wondering where the line between love and betrayal had blurred. I was rebuilding, stronger and smarter than before. I reconnected with friends who had been distant while I was consumed by work and the relationship. Their support reminded me of who I was outside of her shadow, capable, resilient, and worthy of respect. I started investing in myself, not just financially, but emotionally, taking trips I had postponed, joining new projects, and even picking up hobbies I had abandoned. Every little step felt like reclaiming territory that had been silently stolen from me. Meanwhile, Sarah's attempts to interfere or reclaim some semblance of control only highlighted her own failures. Every message she sent, every social post flaunting her supposed independence, came across as desperate and hollow. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Watching her scramble, trying to repair her reputation, only reinforced what I already knew. The real power lay with me, quietly thriving, while she floundered in her own mess. There were moments I had to remind myself not to dwell on anger or resentment. I allowed myself reflection, not fixation. I forgave myself for trusting, for believing, for investing my heart so fully, but I never forgave her deceit. That lesson, harsh as it was, became the foundation for my empowerment by the end of the month. I realized I had not only survived, but grown. The betrayal that once threatened to crush me had become the catalyst for self-reclamation. And as I poured a cup of coffee one quiet morning, sunlight streaming through the apartment windows, I felt a calm certainty settle over me. I had built a life that no one could destroy, and I had done it silently, steadily, and completely on my own terms. But even with this newfound strength, I knew the final chapter, the complete unraveling of her ego, was still waiting. Months passed, and by now, everything had changed. My life was steady, thriving, untouchable. Business was growing, friendships had deepened, and for the first time, I felt truly independent and tethered from the weight of betrayal, yet carrying every lesson it had taught me. I had rebuilt myself in silence, brick by brick, stronger than I had ever been before. Sarah tried again. A message here, a social media tag there, a thinly veiled attempt to reconnect through mutual friends. But by now, her reputation had already crumbled. The truth of her actions had reached everyone who mattered, and no one was taking her side. Each of her attempts to claw back some semblance of control only highlighted her desperation, and I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The power had shifted completely, and I had no need to prove that everyone could see the outcome. I remember one evening, walking through the park where we used to sit and dream about our future, and I realized how far I had come. The betrayal that had once shattered me now felt like a catalyst, a force that had pushed me to become stronger, wiser, more grounded. I didn't need her approval, her affection, or even her acknowledgement. I had built my life silently, and it was mine entirely. Then came the final moment. Sarah reached out one last time, attempting a direct confrontation, perhaps hoping for reconciliation or closure. I read her message once, smiled faintly, and deleted it without a response. That was all she could say. A silent victory, louder than any argument, more cutting than any insult I could have hurled. She was left with nothing, no control, no leverage, no ego intact. I paused on a bench, feeling the crisp air, the hum of the city, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had not just survived the betrayal, but had risen above it. I had walked away, thrived, and reclaimed every ounce of dignity she tried to steal. And as the sun set, casting golden light across the path ahead, I realized that this was freedom, the kind that comes from walking away, silent but victorious, leaving the past exactly where it belongs. I had built my future alone, silently, and no one could take it from me.